chosen ones. Something happened inside you, and if you are honest, you have felt it for a while now. It did not begin yesterday, and it was not caused by one event. It was quieter than that. Somewhere beneath the routines, beneath the responsibilities, beneath the version of yourself that kept showing up every day, something began to shift. For a long time you carried a weight you could never fully explain. Some days you called it failure, other days you called it anxiety. There were mornings when you woke up already tired, not because your body lacked rest, but because your spirit was carrying questions your mind could not answer yet. And still, something inside you refused to go out. Even during the seasons when you doubted yourself, even during the nights when you stared at the ceiling wondering why life felt so different for you than it seemed to feel for everyone else, that quiet fire remained. The hardest part was never that other people failed to understand you. The hardest part was the season when you stopped trusting what you already knew. Yet every step of that journey was revealing something. Not through achievement, not through recognition, through survival. Through the moments when you kept going without knowing why. Through the days when nobody saw the battle taking place inside you, and you carried it anyway. What you are holding now is not the residue of what happened to you. It is the strength that remained after everything tried to take it away. And whether you realized it or not, the forces that benefited from your confusion recognized that strength long before you did. The question has never been whether the power inside you is real. The question is whether you are finally ready to stop calling it something smaller than it is. Whether you are ready to look back at your own story and see that what felt random was forming a pattern all along. If you are hearing these words right now, allow yourself a moment to be fully here. Set down the unfinished tasks, the constant noise, the pressure to stay productive. Take one slow breath and let your shoulders soften. What you are about to understand may change the way you see the experiences you once wished had never happened. Because you have felt this before, you felt it when you were younger and somehow noticed things other people seemed to miss. Maybe it was the way a room changed before anyone spoke. Maybe it was a feeling you could never explain but could never ignore. You learned very early that some of your deepest knowing arrived before evidence did. You felt it sitting quietly in the back seat of a car, staring out a window longer than everyone else. You felt it during conversations where you were physically present, but somewhere deeper inside you were listening for something nobody else seemed to hear. You felt it in moments of prayer, creativity, stillness and wonder, when time seemed to disappear and something larger moved through you. There are patterns in your life that deserve your attention. Not coincidences, not imagination. Patterns. Signs that a part of you has been waking up, while another part was still searching for language to describe it. The first pattern is your intuition. It has become harder and harder to ignore. You have walked into rooms and immediately felt what nobody was saying. There were moments when everyone around you appeared comfortable, yet something inside you quietly stepped back. You smiled, participated, and stayed polite, but a deeper part of you already knew what your mind would only understand much later. You have felt it in relationships too. Sometimes the truth arrived long before the evidence. Sometimes you knew a path was not yours before taking the first step. What lives inside you is more than guessing. It is a sensitivity that has been developing through years of observation, experience, and quiet awareness. And before this message is over, you will understand why that inner signal has become stronger. The second pattern is that places, conversations, and environments that once fit comfortably no longer feel the same. You can still remember the version of yourself who could blend in, who could stay in certain rooms and pretend everything felt right. But something has changed. Conversations that once filled entire evenings now leave you empty. Certain spaces feel strangely small, as if you have outgrown a life that once felt familiar. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. Part of you has begun moving toward what is true, and once that movement begins, Old identities struggle to hold their shape. The discomfort you feel is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is guidance. It is your inner compass pointing toward a life that matches who you are becoming. The third pattern is a restlessness that feels creative rather than destructive. There is something inside you that wants expression. Something that wants to be built, shared, spoken, written, created, or lived. It keeps returning no matter how many times you try to push it aside. You may wake in the middle of the night with ideas that seem too large for the hour. You may find yourself staring into ordinary moments while sensing possibilities that others overlook. This is not impatience. This is not nervous energy looking for somewhere to go. This is the pressure of a gift that has waited a long time for room to breathe. The fourth pattern appears in your dreams. Something about them has changed. They linger after waking. The images fade, yet the feeling remains. Sometimes you wake carrying a sense that something important was shown to you, even if you cannot fully explain it. Your deeper mind is receiving messages that your waking self is still learning how to hold. You are not imagining that process. You are growing into it. And the fifth pattern may be the oldest one of all. When truth arrives, your body often knows before your mind does. A sudden stillness, a feeling moving through your chest, a quiet recognition that asks for no proof, because something deeper has already recognized what is real. Over time, you learn to trust those moments. You stop dismissing them. You stop treating them as coincidence. That inner recognition has been serving you far longer than you realize. When you step back and look at all of these experiences together, they form a single picture. They are not separate events scattered across your life. They are evidence of something returning. A deeper intelligence within you has been remembering itself. And this is the first truth you need to understand about everything that has been happening. What you are experiencing is not random, it is not weakness, it is not confusion. It is the beginning of a restoration that has been unfolding quietly for much longer than you think. There is something important you need to understand about what has been happening inside you. What you have felt is not imagination, wishful thinking, or spiritual symbolism. It is connected to a real state of human awareness, one that has been studied, observed, and documented, yet still remains unfamiliar to most people because they only touch it in rare moments. History's most creative minds seem to enter this state again and again. They often described it differently, yet the experience carried the same feeling. Ideas arrived whole instead of piece by piece. Answers appeared before the process that should have produced them. What looked like genius from the outside often felt like deep alignment from the inside. Neuroscientist Dr. Roger Sperry spent decades studying how the two hemispheres of the brain work together. His research explored logic and intuition, analysis and imagination, language and pattern recognition. What he discovered helped explain something many people have felt but struggled to describe. In most adults, these two sides of the mind operate more like distant neighbors than partners. One becomes loud and dominant, the other remains present but quieter, pushed into the background over time. As a result, many people move through life using only part of the intelligence available to them. Yet there are moments when that division begins to disappear. The analytical mind and the intuitive mind start working together rather than competing for control. When that happens, something opens. The mind feels larger, clearer, and more connected to itself. Researchers often call this whole brain activation. People who have experienced it usually do not need a technical name for it. They recognize the feeling immediately. It is that rare state where your thoughts, instincts, creativity, and perception move together like one current instead of pulling in different directions. You have felt it before, maybe while creating something that seemed to flow through you effortlessly, maybe during prayer, deep focus, or a quiet moment when an answer arrived before you had finished asking the question. For a few minutes, everything worked together. In those moments, life feels different. Time changes, effort softens, What felt impossible an hour earlier suddenly becomes obvious. You stop chasing clarity, and clarity begins finding you. Many remarkable innovators appeared to work from that state. People like Nikola Tesla often described solutions arriving almost fully formed, rather than being painfully constructed step by step. The difference was never simply effort, it was access. The same pattern appeared in creative leaders, inventors, artists, and visionaries across generations. They discovered ways of entering a condition where logic and imagination stopped arguing with each other. In that space, insight moved freely. And if you are listening carefully, you already know exactly what I am talking about. Not because someone taught it to you, because there have been moments in your own life when you touched it. The surprising truth is that this state is not the reward for genius. It is the source of it. You were never meant to spend your life trying to earn access to it. You began your life inside it. When you were very young, before expectations became heavier, before performance became more important than curiosity, your mind functioned differently. You asked questions freely. You imagined without permission. You moved naturally between intuition and logic because nobody had convinced you they were supposed to be separate. Think about a child staring out a window, completely absorbed by wonder. Think about the effortless creativity that appears before anyone starts measuring, grading, comparing, or correcting it. That state is closer to your original design than most people realize. Research has repeatedly shown that young children display extraordinary creative potential. The reason is not that children know more than adults. It is that the connection between different parts of their intelligence remains largely intact. The signal is still whole. The imagination still speaks. The deeper knowing still has room to be heard. As life moves forward, something often changes. Expectations arrive, systems arrive, pressure arrives. Slowly, the mind learns which parts of itself are rewarded and which parts are ignored. Many people adapt by becoming highly functional. They learn how to perform, achieve, comply, and survive. Yet somewhere along the way, another part of them grows quieter. Not gone, just quieter. And perhaps this is where your story becomes personal, because there were seasons when you sensed there was more inside you than you could access. Seasons when you felt flashes of clarity that disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Seasons when you wondered whether something was wrong with you, because the version of yourself you glimpsed in rare moments seemed impossible to reach consistently. Nothing was wrong with you. Pause for a moment and let that settle. Nothing was wrong with you. Something valuable was interrupted. Something natural was pushed into the background. Yet even then it never disappeared. It waited. It remained beneath the noise, beneath the pressure, beneath the years you spent searching for answers. It waited for the part of you that refused to stop asking deeper questions. This is why modern life often feels so exhausting for people like you. When the mind becomes dominated by survival, everything starts looking like a problem to solve. Days become lists. Relationships become responsibilities. Life becomes something to manage rather than experience. Meanwhile, another intelligence inside you keeps trying to speak. It is the part that notices patterns before evidence appears. The part that feels the atmosphere of a room before words are spoken. The part that quietly recognizes truth even when appearances point somewhere else. That voice rarely disappears. It simply gets interrupted. Imagine trying to have a meaningful conversation while someone constantly talks over you. Eventually, you stop speaking, even though you still have something important to say. For many people, that is exactly what happened to their deeper intelligence. Researchers have suggested several reasons for this shift. One of the most powerful begins in education itself. Year after year, children are taught to memorize, repeat, perform, and conform. Imagination remains present, but it receives less attention. Curiosity slowly gives way to compliance. The second force is the quiet stress that many adults carry every day. Not dramatic danger, something more subtle. The pressure of bills, responsibilities, unfinished goals, comparisons, expectations, and the constant feeling that you should be further along than you are. That kind of stress changes the way a person experiences life. It keeps the mind scanning for problems and preparing for the next demand. And when survival takes over, the deeper state you were born to access becomes harder to reach. Perhaps that explains something you have felt for years. The exhaustion was never only physical. Part of you was carrying the weight of living disconnected from something that always belonged to you. The mind was never designed to live in deep creativity and constant survival at the same time. When those two states compete, survival almost always wins. And if you have spent years carrying responsibilities, pressure, uncertainty, and the quiet weight of trying to hold everything together, you already know what that feels like. There is a third force that affects this more than most people realize. It is the gradual fragmentation of attention. The endless shifting from one thing to another, the constant interruption, the feeling of reaching for depth while living in a world that keeps pulling you back to the surface. The state we have been talking about does not live in distraction, it lives in depth. It lives in the moments when your attention becomes so present that something deeper inside you finally has room to speak. Yet for years, the modern world has been conditioning people away from that depth without them even noticing. These forces work together slowly, day after day, year after year. What they produce is measurable, observable, and deeply human. They create adults who sense that something important has been lost, but cannot quite explain what it is. Maybe you have felt that yourself. Maybe there have been moments during prayer when a profound sense of knowing suddenly appeared. Maybe it happened while creating something, sitting quietly alone, or staring out a window after a difficult season. For a brief moment, everything became clear, and then it was gone. Not completely gone, just out of reach again. That experience is far more common than you think. Many people spend years touching the edge of something extraordinary without understanding why they cannot remain there. They know there is more available to them because they have tasted it, yet they cannot seem to hold on to it long enough to trust it. But there is another layer to this story that science alone cannot fully explain. What has been surfacing inside you carries value far beyond productivity, success, or achievement. A unified mind does more than process information efficiently. It begins to perceive life differently. Patterns become visible where confusion once existed. Connections appear between events that once felt random. Certain truths become easier to recognize, even when they are hidden beneath appearances. You may have noticed this already. There are moments when something inside you quietly knows. Before the evidence arrives, before the explanation forms, before logic finishes its work. A deeper awareness has already recognized what matters. That awareness does not come from the noise around you. It comes from somewhere beneath the noise. This is one reason so many wisdom traditions throughout history described higher states of awareness in similar ways. They were never speaking only about performance or intelligence. They were pointing toward a state of inner alignment, a condition in which the human mind and spirit operate together rather than apart. And this is where your story becomes larger than neuroscience. Because when a person begins recovering that deeper clarity, something changes. They become harder to manipulate through fear, harder to distract through noise, harder to convince that their value depends on constant external validation. A person who can think clearly, feel deeply, and trust their own perception becomes difficult to control. That is why clarity matters so much. The greatest challenge to your path was never your effort. You have always been willing to work. The greater challenge was confusion, doubt, fragmentation. The constant separation from the deeper knowing that already existed within you. And perhaps that is why so much of your journey has felt like preparation. Pause for a moment and notice what you are feeling right now. Not what you are thinking, what you are feeling. Because there is often a moment when recognition arrives before explanation. A moment when something older and wiser inside you quietly says, "Yes, I know this." If that feeling is present, there is something I want to share with you. Researchers studying the very principles we have been discussing developed a tool designed to support the restoration of hemispheric synchronization. It is not a philosophy, and it does not require hours of practice, complicated routines, or another demand on an already full life. It is an 8-minute audio experience built around neural synchronization technology. The intention is simple. Create the conditions that help both hemispheres of the brain begin working together again in the way they naturally did when you were younger. You put on headphones, you sit quietly, you breathe. That is all. We will come back to this in greater detail because understanding why it works matters. But I wanted to mention it now because some of you already felt a response the moment the possibility was mentioned. Sometimes recognition arrives before explanation. And when that happens, it deserves acknowledgement. If you feel drawn to explore it, the information is available through the link provided with this message. Take your time. Listen to your own discernment. What comes next will help the larger picture make sense. There is one truth that must be understood before moving forward. You cannot force your way back into this state. Many people spend years trying harder. They pray harder, work harder, push harder. They assume that more effort will somehow reconnect them with what feels missing. Yet effort alone cannot restore a state built on integration. You cannot solve fragmentation by becoming more fragmented. The deeper shift occurs when the proper conditions are introduced. One of the most powerful pathways for that process involves sound. Long before language became the primary way humans understood the world, rhythm and sound were already shaping the nervous system. Certain auditory patterns interact with the brain in ways conscious effort cannot. That understanding led researchers to explore how carefully engineered sound sequences could support synchronization between the hemispheres. The goal was never to create something artificial. The goal was to help remove interference so the brain could return to what it was already designed to do. And the people who experience that shift rarely describe it as gaining something new. They describe remembering. Thoughts begin flowing more naturally. Conversations feel easier. Decisions carry less internal conflict. Creativity returns with a familiarity that feels almost nostalgic, as though a forgotten part of themselves has finally come back into the room. There is often a subtle feeling beneath all of it, a feeling that life is no longer working against them, a feeling that something once interrupted has started moving again. Not through magic, not through wishful thinking, through restoration, through the gradual return of capacities that were present long before the world taught them to live disconnected from themselves. And that changes far more than the way a person thinks. It changes the way they experience being alive. Before we go any further, there is one more truth beneath everything we have talked about so far. It is the piece that changes the meaning of the entire journey, and for many people, it is the part they never fully allow themselves to see because it asks them to look back at their pain through a completely different lens. What if the years that felt like suppression were not only taking something from you? What if they were also building something within you? Pause with that for a moment, because one of the greatest misunderstandings about your story is the belief that the difficult seasons made you less than you were meant to be, that the waiting diminished you, that the confusion weakened you, that the wilderness somehow damaged the original design. But that is not what happened. The truth is far more surprising. The pressure that seemed determined to disconnect you from your deeper intelligence ended up refining abilities that comfort never could have developed. The searching sharpened you. The uncertainty taught you to listen more carefully. The years spent trying to find what felt missing trained you to recognize truth in places where most people would have stopped looking. You became sensitive to things that cannot easily be measured. Not fragile, sensitive. There is a difference. You learned to notice what others overlooked. You learned to trust subtle signals. You learned to feel the difference between something that merely sounds convincing and something that carries the weight of truth. And that kind of discernment rarely develops in easy seasons. There were years when you felt as though you were searching for something you could not name. You could feel its absence more clearly than its presence. Yet because you kept searching, because you refused to settle for shallow answers, another capacity began growing inside you. A deeper form of perception, a deeper form of faith. Not the kind that depends on constant evidence, the kind that keeps walking when evidence disappears, the kind that continues building in the dark, the kind that survives long enough to become part of who you are. Many people misunderstand faith because they treat it like an emotion. But the faith you developed became something stronger than a feeling. It became structure. It became the framework that carried you through seasons when certainty was unavailable. And because of that, you gained something the younger version of yourself did not yet possess. The child you once were had extraordinary access to imagination, intuition, and possibility. But the person you are now carries those gifts alongside experience, resilience, discernment, and wisdom earned through lived reality. That combination is rare. It is born in people who have walked through long seasons of searching without abandoning themselves. It develops in people who continue asking deeper questions when easier answers would have been more comfortable. And perhaps that is why so much of your journey unfolded the way it did. Because some forms of strength cannot be inherited, they must be forged. Some forms of clarity can only emerge after confusion has taught you the difference between appearance and truth. Some forms of wisdom only arrive after years of wondering why life unfolded the way it did. Looking back now, you may begin to see something you could not see while living through it. The loss taught you the value of what was missing. The silence taught you how deeply you needed the signal. The distance taught you how to recognize home. And now you stand in a very different place. Not at the beginning, not starting over, arriving. That distinction matters more than you realize. Because restoration is not the creation of something new, it is the return of something original, now strengthened by everything it survived. At its simplest level, what we have been discussing is this. You were born with a mind that naturally operated in a highly integrated state. Logic and intuition worked together. Creativity and perception flowed freely. The connection existed before the world gradually trained you away from it. Over time, stress, education, social conditioning, distraction, and adaptation weakened that connection. Yet even then, it never fully disappeared. You caught glimpses of it. You felt it during prayer when the words stopped and something deeper remained. You felt it in creative moments when ideas arrived faster than you could explain them. You felt it when an answer appeared whole before your reasoning mind finished constructing it. Those moments were real. You were never imagining them. You were touching the edge of a state that science has only recently begun learning how to describe more clearly. And perhaps that explains why you are still listening. Many people stop searching long before this point. They eventually convince themselves that mental fog is normal, that diminishing creativity is inevitable, that the sharper, more alive version of themselves belongs to the past. They adapt, they manage, they settle, not because they lack potential, but because they stop believing restoration is possible. Yet something in you refused to make that agreement. You kept asking questions. You kept wondering why those rare moments of clarity felt more real than the fragmented state you returned to afterward. You kept sensing that the person you became during your best moments was not a fantasy. It was a memory. And that question has followed you for years. Why does the version of me that appears in those moments feel more authentic than the one that struggles every day? That is not the question of someone who has given up. It is the question of someone who remembers, even if only faintly, what they were originally capable of. Researchers like Dr. Roger Sperry spent decades studying the architecture behind this phenomenon. His work revealed that the brain operates very differently when its hemispheres function together rather than separately. Each side possesses remarkable abilities on its own, yet something extraordinary emerges when they synchronize. The deeper implication of that discovery often goes unnoticed. This state was never meant for a select few. It was never reserved for rare geniuses. It was the natural inheritance of the human mind before interruption occurred. That is why the gap matters. The gap between the child who moved through life with openness and integrated awareness and the adult who learned to survive through fragmentation. That gap is not your identity. It is the distance you have been traveling. And the story that comes next begins with someone who discovered that distance could be shortened. A nurse from San Diego described spending years feeling as though life was happening around her rather than through her. She cared deeply about her work, yet she moved through her days carrying a quiet sense of disconnection, as if some essential part of herself remained just beyond reach. She described it in a way that stayed with people long after they heard it. For years, she felt as though she was watching her own life from behind a pane of glass. She showed up, worked hard, and cared deeply about the people around her. Yet there was always a quiet feeling that she was observing her story more than fully living it, as though the strongest version of herself had somehow drifted just beyond reach. Then something began to change. Not overnight, not with dramatic breakthroughs, and not in the way so many promises make it sound. After just 2 weeks of spending 8 minutes a day with the process we have been discussing, she noticed something simple but profound. She trusted her own mind again. Ideas that once felt scattered began coming together naturally. Decisions no longer felt like traps where every option led to the wrong outcome, and conversations flowed with a clarity she had not felt in years. The way she described it was powerful precisely because it was so ordinary. She said it felt as though her mind had come back to her. And perhaps that is the most accurate description of restoration. It is not about becoming someone new or transforming into a different person. It is about returning to someone familiar, someone who has always been there beneath the noise, waiting to be remembered. What happened was not mystical in the way people often imagine. It was the natural result of reducing interference and allowing the brain to function more closely to the way it was originally designed to function. That possibility inspired a team of neuroscientists, led by neurologist Dr. Daniel Barron, to develop something practical enough to fit into the life of a real person. They did not create a retreat that requires disappearing from your responsibilities or expensive equipment that only specialists can operate. They did not build a complicated routine demanding hours from an already crowded schedule. Instead, they created something remarkably simple: 8 minutes, a pair of headphones, closed eyes, and a space to receive. The process uses what they call neural synchronization technology. Its purpose is to help create conditions where both hemispheres of the brain can work together again, supporting the integrated state many people naturally experienced when they were younger. They call this process the genius switch. And according to the team behind it, the focus is not merely relaxation, but true synchronization. That distinction matters because many people have already tried tools that sounded promising, but delivered very little. Some methods focus on isolated frequencies or individual aspects of brain function, while whole brain synchronization depends on both hemispheres working together as a unified system. According to the researchers involved, that level of precision requires far more than good intentions. It requires careful engineering. The genius switch was developed specifically to address that challenge. When the work was first shared among professional colleagues, some believed the technology justified a price several times higher than what was ultimately offered. Traditional neurofeedback sessions often cost hundreds of dollars per visit, while personal neurofeedback systems can cost thousands, creating barriers that many people simply cannot cross. This approach was designed to remove those barriers. Instead of appointments, specialized equipment, or extensive training, the process was condensed into a daily 8-minute experience that fits naturally into ordinary life. The current price is $39 through the page connected to this message, including an additional discount for those who have stayed long enough to understand the deeper context behind what is being offered. Several additional resources are included as well. These include a guided visualization experience, a practical nutrition guide focused on reducing common causes of brain fog, a classic manifestation text that has influenced generations of personal development teachings, and a visual guide outlining daily habits that support a more integrated state of mind. Together, these resources are designed to support greater clarity, creativity, focus, and self-trust. Everything is protected by a full money-back guarantee. There are no complicated conditions, no hidden requirements, and no fine print designed to create obstacles. If the experience does not produce the kind of improvement described, you are entitled to a complete refund, a policy that reflects the confidence the team has in what they have created. Before moving forward, one thing deserves to be mentioned. If you search online for recordings with similar names or descriptions, you will find many alternatives that sound remarkably close to what has been discussed here. Yet according to the researchers behind this work, most do not contain the synchronization architecture responsible for the intended results, even if the language sounds familiar. In other words, two things may sound similar while functioning very differently. The official version remains available directly through Dr. Barron and his team through the information provided with this message. And if something inside you has been responding throughout this conversation, if you recognize that feeling of standing at the edge of greater clarity without knowing how to access it consistently, then perhaps this is something worth exploring for yourself. The invitation is simple. Give yourself 8 minutes a day, put on the headphones, close your eyes, and allow space for the noise to settle. If that feels aligned, follow your curiosity and see what begins to unfold. Because beneath everything we have discussed, this was never only about improving focus or increasing performance. It was about remembering the version of yourself that felt connected, the creativity that once moved freely, and the trust you once had in your own perception before life taught you to question every instinct. You were never meant to spend your life operating far below your true capacity. Even during the seasons that felt delayed, disconnected, or uncertain, something inside you kept reaching toward greater wholeness. And that is why this moment matters, because you are not arriving at power, you are arriving at return. The child within you who noticed things other people missed, who learned quickly, and who felt connected to something deeper than what could be seen with the eyes, was never lost. That part of you never disappeared. It simply learned how to survive in a world that often rewarded forgetting more than remembering, practicality more than wonder, and certainty more than inner knowing. For a season, forgetting felt normal. You learned how to function, how to meet expectations, and how to carry responsibilities without drawing attention to the questions you still carried inside. Yet beneath all of that, a quieter part of you remained present, patiently waiting for the moment when you would remember what had always been there. You did not lose yourself. You survived years of subtle messages that taught you to trust external approval more than your own perception. What worked against you was rarely destruction itself. It was distraction, confusion, and the slow erosion of confidence in what you already knew deep down. And for a while, that forgetting seemed convincing, not because you lacked strength, but because you lacked language. You could feel that something important was missing, and you sensed there was a way back. Yet you did not have a name for what had been interrupted, or a map for how to return. Now you do, and this is where the story begins to change. Across many wisdom traditions, there is always a moment before the crossing, A moment when everything that once seemed disconnected suddenly starts making sense. From that place, the wilderness looks different. What felt like delay begins to reveal itself as preparation. What felt like punishment starts looking more like formation, and the pieces that once appeared random begin fitting together into a pattern you could never see while you were living through it. That is the threshold you are standing at now. Take a moment and look back at the relationships that taught you loyalty when others walked away, the dreams that arrived years before you were ready to carry them, and the mornings when you continued to pray even when the silence felt overwhelming. Think about the nights when you searched for deeper answers because surface-level explanations could no longer satisfy your soul. None of it was wasted. The questions mattered, the waiting mattered, and even the tears carried meaning. Every season of confusion held something valuable within it, even when you could not yet see what it was shaping. Many of the greatest stories of wisdom begin this way, not with certainty or confidence, but with honesty. Solomon stood before a responsibility far larger than anything he felt prepared for, and what made him remarkable was not that he pretended to have answers, but that he was willing to admit he needed more than he currently possessed. What followed was not more instruction, it was greater capacity. He was given more access, more ability to receive, and more room to carry what his calling required. And perhaps that is what this season is truly about for you. You have spent enough years gathering information, searching for explanations, and trying to think your way into clarity. What is opening now is something deeper. The ability to see more clearly, recognize truth more quickly, and hear what has been trying to reach you beneath the noise all along. The clarity you have been seeking was never reserved for a special group of people. It was never a rare personality trait given to a fortunate few. It is the natural expression of a mind functioning the way it was designed to function, a mind operating in harmony with itself rather than in conflict. And the forces that benefited from your confusion never truly destroyed that capacity. They delayed it, and for a time the delay felt permanent. But pause for a moment and let this settle into a deeper place within you. The delay is over. Allow these words to move beyond analysis and into the quieter part of you that recognized something long before logic caught up. There is a kind of knowing that arrives before explanation, and many of you felt it while listening to this message. That knowing deserves your attention. Before this voice grows quiet, I want to speak directly to you. To the person who kept going when nobody understood what they were carrying, who remained faithful to a vision they could not yet prove, and who stayed curious in a world that often rewards conformity more than wonder. To the person who protected a small, creative flame through seasons when letting it go would have seemed completely reasonable. Your perseverance mattered. Your faithfulness mattered. You were never invisible to the process that was shaping you, even when it felt like nothing was happening. What is being restored now is not compensation for lost time. It is the expansion of the person who needed every lesson, every challenge, and every season of searching in order to carry what comes next with wisdom instead of impulse. Take a slow breath and let it remind you how far you have come. The strength you carry today was not created by accident. It was formed through years of becoming someone capable of holding deeper clarity without being overwhelmed by it. And that person is already here. The years built them, the waiting refined them, and the journey prepared them. What is beginning now is not the arrival of something new, it is the return of something original. A mind remembering how to function as a whole, a life no longer divided against itself, and a deeper intelligence finally being given room to breathe again. What was interrupted is beginning to move once more. Not because you forced it, but because you stayed. You kept walking when easier paths invited you to stop, and you refused to believe that fragmentation was the final chapter of your story. The confusion did not win, the delay did not win, the forgetting did not win. What belongs to your deepest design can become quiet for a season, but it cannot be permanently removed. And eventually, something shifts. A conversation, a realization, a message, or a moment of recognition arrives, and what once felt distant begins returning with a clarity that feels both surprising and familiar. It comes back strengthened by everything the journey added to it. That moment may be closer than you think. In fact, part of you may already recognize it. If there is someone in your life carrying this same quiet longing, someone who senses there is more within them than they have been able to access, share this message with them. Sometimes recognition arrives because one person finds the courage to speak what another has been feeling in silence. And if these words touched something real in you, leave a comment and share that experience. Someone reading your words later may discover they are far less alone than they believed. If you still feel drawn toward the path we discussed, the information remains available through the link provided with this message. Explore it only if it genuinely resonates with you, and trust your own discernment as you do. When you are ready, give yourself those 8 minutes. Put on the headphones, close your eyes, and create space for your mind to remember what it has always known. What you were made for does not begin someday in the distant future. It begins the moment you stop treating your wholeness as a possibility and start recognizing it as your inheritance. Everything that came before was leading here. Go forward carrying the wholeness that has belonged to you all along.